I want to tell you about a property that I walked into after our owner handed me the keys. The owner had moved out and everything was signed. The property management agreement was in place. And I went back in to do what I always do, a proper walkthrough before we listed it. What I found inside that condo, I was not prepared for. And I want to tell you this story because it's the clearest picture I can give you of what this business actually requires when things go wrong and what you need from a property manager when they do. Here's where it ended. 14 days after I walked into that property, it was clean, treated, and undergoing a prevention plan on the market within weeks. A qualified tenant was placed, the owner received their first month's rent, and security deposit was in hand. That condo, the one that had completely been uninhabitable when I first stepped inside it, became a functioning, income-producing investment that the owner never had to touch. They never had to make a single call to a vendor. They never had to maintain a timeline or follow up with re-inspections. They simply just had to hand me the keys, and when it was over, they had cash flow. That's the job. Now, let me tell you what that actually took to get there. When I do a pre-listing, I walk through the property. I'm not just checking boxes. I'm looking at the property the way a future tenant is going to experience it, and the way a future problem is going to reveal itself if you don't catch it first. I walked into the properties where the carpets needed replacing, where the paint on the walls the wrong color for a rental market, and where the appliances were the end of their shelf life and needed to be disclosed or replaced prior to bringing someone in. This was different though. The pest situation in that condo was extreme. I'm not gonna be graphic about it, but I'll tell you this, there was no way that this developed after the owner had moved out. It had been there all along. And when they handed me the keys, said nothing. Now, I want to be clear about something because I think it matters on how you understand this story. I wasn't angry, I was focused because anger doesn't solve the problem. And that investor needed this property on the market and they had a mortgage to cover. They already relocated and they were counting on this property generating income. And they were counting on me, so I got to work. The first call I made was to my pest control vendor, not a platform listing and not whoever had the next available slot. A vendor that I had a relationship with, and it was someone from my network who I've worked with in the past. Someone who knows my standards and who knows I will respond the way the situation was required. They were on site the same day. We did the initial treatment, and then because I wasn't going to walk a tenant into this property I wasn't certain about, we scheduled multiple follow-up visits. We needed to see the result, not just give them a report that the treatment had been done. And while the treatment cycle was running, my team went in and out and cleaned the property to my standard. The property needed to be shown exactly how it would be if it were my own personal property. Like I told you at the beginning, I look at every property like it was mine. If this were my investment, would I accept it? That's the standard. After the treatment was confirmed complete and the follow-up inspections and the move in and move out clean were performed, we set the owner up with an ongoing pest control plan. Not one-time fix, but a prevention system, because whoever was going to live in that condo deserved an on-demand access to pet services if anything ever came up. The investor deserved to know that the problem wasn't going to resurface on my watch. Then we relist the property, we treated the surrounding areas, we ran our standards with the applicant screening, and we placed a qualified tenant from start to finish 14 days. I want to be honest with you about why I'm telling you this. It's not to impress you, and it's not to tell you that every property that I take on has a dramatic backstory. Most of them don't. Most of my investors hand me properties in reasonable shape, and we do a walkthrough and price it correctly for the market, find a qualified tenant, and the relationship runs smoothly from there on. But this story matters because it shows you what happens in those moments when those situations aren't as smooth, because those moments will come. Not necessarily a pest infestation, but something, a water heater at the end of its shelf life, or a tenant who fails to pay the landlord, or a maintenance issue that has resurfaced on a Friday night, a previous owner who didn't disclose something that they should have. When that happens, what do you have? If you're self-managing, you have yourself making calls. You're not sure about vendors you haven't vetted. You're under pressure, planning, while also trying to manage your actual career and life at home. If you have a wrong property manager, someone who sends you work orders and a bill and hopes for the best, if you have a right property manager, you'll have a system that activates, a vendor network that responds, and a person who picks up the phone, assesses the situation, and handles, then calls you and tells you what happens next. Not to ask you what to do, But that's the difference, and this is not a small one. Let me speak directly to a specific person watching this, because I know you're out there. You didn't set out to become a landlord. You inherited a property or you relocated because of work and you couldn't sell it in time. That's life. Your circumstances changing, and you ended up holding a home that you're not living in, that you're not sure what to do with, that you're managing yourself because you didn't know who to trust, or because the last person you trusted didn't earn it. You're doing the best you can, but you're also fielding tenant calls at 10 p.m. and you're trying to figure out who to call when the HVAC goes out, wondering whether the rent you're charging is actually supporting the market, or if it's just a number you came up with yourself. That's not your fault. That's not what you signed up for. So when I work with accidental investors, that's the first thing I do. Reframe what they're actually sitting on, because what feels like a burden right now is in the right hands is an asset, a producing asset, something that you can hold, something that cash flows, something that builds equity over time without you having to manage it. You went from being a homeowner to being an investor. That's something you should be proud of. You just need the right person managing that investment so you can actually enjoy what you built. And if the property you're holding on to right now is in worse shape than you'd like, there are issues that you've been putting off, or if it's been sitting vacant longer than it should, if the last tenant left things in a state that haven't fully been dealt with, that's okay. That's what I'm here for. I don't need a perfect property. I just need an owner who's willing to let me do things the right way. I want to close with something practical, because that's how I think. What made that pest condo story end the way it did, cleaned properly, a placed tenant, satisfied investors, it wasn't luck, it was hustle. It was an infrastructure that I had built before I had ever walked through that door. The relationships I built with vendors that were already in place. The communication protocol that I established between me and the owner. The inspection process that I use when I take on a new property is documented and it's consistent, which is why I went back for that second walkthrough after all. And the standard, the one that I treat every property as if it were mine, that's not something I decided at the moment. That's something I decided when I built this company, because I knew there would be moments like this that would have to pass the problem back to me and the owner would call it a day. I don't do that. It's not my operating system. Service before self was drilled into me 20 years while serving in the Air Force, and it was more than I completely expected. If you're an accidental landlord who's overwhelmed by property you didn't plan for, if you've got a situation that feels more than you can manage on your own, I want to talk to you, not to pitch to you, not to sign a contract on the spot, but I want to listen to what your pain points are. I want to ask you the right questions and build a mission plan specifically around your situation. That's what I do. I don't charge for that. The conversation is free. Talk to me, the owner. Tell me what you've got, and we'll figure this out together. Remember, flexibility is the key to air power, but also in property management, flexibility is the key to cash flow.